Good day, learners. This is your accounting teacher, Sir AJ, and welcome back to my channel. So, for today and in this video, we will be discussing the second part of the accounting for employee benefits. So, if you're now ready to learn more about accounting for employee benefits, we will start this video discussion. So good day, learners. Tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, this is the part 2 of accounting for employee benefits. In this video, we will be talking about number 1, post-employment benefits. In the part 1, we have talked about short-term, termination, and other long-term benefits. So in this video, we will be focusing on post-employment benefits. And we will also be focusing on defined contribution plans and defined benefit plans. So, first we will talk about post-employment benefits. For post-employment benefit plans, these are formal or informal arrangements under which an entity provides post-employment benefits for one or more employees. These are classified as either defined contribution plan or defined benefit plan, depending on the economic substance of the plan as derived from its principal terms and conditions. So there are two classifications for post-employment benefit plan. Meron tayong defined contribution at meron tayong defined benefit. Defined contribution plans are those where the entity's legal or constructive obligation is limited only to the amount that it agrees to contribute to the fund. So yun lang yung obligation niya. Thus, the amount of the post-employment benefits received by the employee is determined by the amount of contributions paid and then plus investment returns. So, wala nang pakialam yung employer kapag malaki yung return or maliit yung return. Basta nag-contribute siya sa plan, then tapos na yung kanyang obligation kasi nga defined contribution. In this situation, the actuarial risk or that benefits will be less than expected and the investment risk that the assets invested will be insufficient to meet expected benefits fall in substance on the employee. So yung employee ang magbe-bear ng risk. Hindi siya certain kung may matatanggap ba siya in the future or wala. So medyo pangit on the part of the employee yung defined contribution plan. The second classification of post-employment benefit plan is yung defined benefit plan. The entity's obligation is to provide the agreed benefits to current and former employees. Kaya nga defined benefit kasi ang obligation ni entity is ibigay ang pinag-usapang benefit. So on the part of the employee, mas okay to ang defined benefit plan kasi guaranteed ka or assured ka na yung pinag-usapan nyo ay matatanggap mo talaga in the future. The actuarial risk and the investment risk fall in substance on the entity or on the employer. Sila ang nagbe-bear ng risk. If actuarial or investment experience are worse than expected, then the entity's obligation may be increased. There are also what we call multi-employer plans. It is defined in PAS 19 as defined contribution plans or defined benefit plans that pool the assets contributed by various entities that are not under common control and use those assets to provide benefits to employees of more than one entity on the basis that contribution and benefit levels are determined without regard to the identity of the entity that employs the employees. So let's have an example. For each of the following independent situations, determine whether the post-employment benefit plan described is a defined contribution plan or a defined benefit plan applying the concepts you learned from PAS 19R. Number 1. According to the pension plan of an entity, the employees and entity contribute 5% of the employee's salary to the plan, and the employee is guaranteed a return of the contributions plus 3% a year by the employer. What is this? Answer, this is a defined contribution plan because the entity and the employees contribute a fixed amount, and such contributions are used to pay the employees. So the employer's liability is only limited to its contributions. Number two, an entity has created a voluntary fund to provide retirement benefits for its employees who have more than 7 years service and have a permanent contract with the entity. The entity has a history of paying benefits to its employees which are adjusted for inflation. The entity has signed a contract with a pension fund to establish a fund for the employees. Contributions are paid by the entity, and if the fund does not have enough assets to pay the pension, the entity increases its contributions. For this situation, it is a defined benefit plan because contributions are not fixed, adjusted for inflation, and is increased when the fund becomes insufficient. Hence, the employer bears the risk if payments are not enough. And finally, number three, an entity contributes to an industrial pension plan that provides a pension arrangement for its employees. Many other employers also contribute to the pension plan, and the entity makes contributions in respect of each employee. These contributions are kept separate from corporate assets and are used together with any investment income to purchase annuities for retired employees. The only obligation of the entity is to pay the annual contributions. For this agreement, it is a defined contribution plan. The only obligation of the entity is to pay its annual contributions. Thus, the employee bears the risk if the fund is insufficient. Further, this can be classified as a multi-employer plan kasi maraming entity yung nagko-contribute sa industrial pension plan. So now let's focus our attention on defined contribution plan. For defined contribution plan, the accounting is straightforward kasi nga, the reporting entity's obligation for each period is determined by the amounts contributed for that period. So yun lang yung i-entry mo. When an employee has rendered service to an entity during a period, the entity shall recognize the contribution payable to a defined contribution plan in exchange for that service as a liability or accrued expense after deducting any contribution already paid, and letter B, as an expense unless another PFRS requires or permits the inclusion of the contribution in the cost of an asset, like sa inventory past 2 or past 16 PPE. So take note, kapag defined contribution plan, you only record your contributions made during the year, debit expense and credit liability or credit cash kapag nagbayad ka na. Discounting. When contributions are not expected to be settled before 12 months, then they shall be discounted using the discount rate. For the disclosure, an entity shall disclose the amount recognized as an expense for defined contribution plans. Where required by PAS 24, you also disclose information about contributions to defined contribution plan for key management personnel. Ang mas mahirap at mas kailangang i-discuss ay yung defined benefit plan. Because in this situation, the accounting is complex kasi actuarial assumptions are required to measure the obligation and the expense, and there is a possibility of actuarial gains and losses. So let's go to measurement of defined benefit plan. There are 4 steps in measuring this. First, determine the deficit or surplus. So using an actuarial technique, we call it the projected unit credit method. You make a reliable estimate of the ultimate cost to the entity of the benefit that employees have earned in return for their service in the current and prior period. So, magpo-project ka ngayon ng future value, magkano ba yung ibabayad mo in 20 years, in 30 years na benefit. Tapos, this requires an entity to determine how much benefit is attributable to to the current and prior periods and to make estimates or actuarial assumptions about demographic variables such as employee turnover and mortality, and also considering financial variables such as future increase in salary, medical costs that will affect the cost of benefits. So again, projected unit credit method, ipoproject mo magkano yung babayaran mo in the future. And you get its present value. So you discount that benefit na future in amount and determine its present value of the defined benefit obligation. We call it the PVDBO and the current service cost. Tapos, you deduct the fair value of any plan asset or FVPA from the present value of defined benefit obligation. Take note, if the present value of defined benefit obligation is greater than the fair value of plan asset, there is deficit. Kasi yung asset mo mas maliit kesa sa obligation mo. Pero if the present value of defined benefit obligation is less than your fair value of plan asset, then there is surplus. So may deficit pag mas malaki yung obligation, may surplus kapag mas malaki yung plan asset. Step 2. Determine the amount of net defined benefit liability or net defined benefit asset. So take note that this is the amount of the deficit or surplus determined in step 1, adjusted for any effect of limiting a net defined benefit asset to the asset ceiling. So take note that if yung na-compute mo sa step 1 ay deficit, then kung ano man yung amount na yun na po ang iyong net defined benefit liability or NDBL. But if yung na-compute mo sa step 1 ay surplus, then yung amount na yon is compared to the asset ceiling. Normally, the asset ceiling is present value of economic benefits. Ang pipiliin mo ay yung lower amount between the surplus and the asset ceiling. Kung ano man yung lower amount, yun yung considered as your net defined benefit asset. Then, if mas mababa ang asset ceiling, then yung difference between the surplus and the asset ceiling, meron tayong tinatawag na asset ceiling effect, yung difference ng dalawa. Mamaya, i-discuss ko sa inyo saan mag-a-affect yung asset ceiling effect. Determine amounts to be recognized in profit or loss. So may 3 parts yung mga defined benefit costs. Yung first 2 sa profit or loss, yung last sa OCI. So yung sa profit or loss, una ay yung mga service cost. Ang mnemonics natin dito ay CPA. That is current service cost, past service cost, and any gain or loss on settlement. The second group ng mga defined benefit costs na i-recognize sa profit or loss ay yung mga net interest on the net defined benefit liability or asset. Take note guys, we are computing for cost. So for example, ang nakuha nyo dito sa gain or loss on settlement ay gain, then you deduct it kasi yung mga costs, they are parang expenses. So yung gain is technically ino-offset niya yung cost. Okay? For net interest, ang mnemonics natin ay, tatlo rin yan, I. So don't forget yung past 19, yung mga ilalagay natin sa profit or loss, it's like you are manifesting that you will become a CPA. CPA, I will become a CPA. So ano yung tatlong I? First, interest cost on the defined benefit obligation. 2, interest income. So, dinededuct ito on plan assets. At pangatlo, interest cost on asset ceiling effect, yung in-explain ko sa inyo kanina. Lahat ng interest na to ay computed using the discount rate. Okay? In the past 19 old standard, iba-ibang rate ang ginagamit for each of this. Pero, for this one, for the revised standard, lahat ng ito kinocompute na gamit ang discount rate. And normally, we multiply them sa beginning balance. So that's for step 3. Step 4 is determine amounts to be recognized in other comprehensive income or OCI. So para naman sa OCI, yung grupo, tawag natin sa kanila ay yung mga remeasurements of the net defined benefit liability or asset. If you remember kanina sa other long-term benefits, dun sa isang video sa part 1, lahat ng tatlo, service cost, interest, net interest, and remeasurements, lahat yung PL. Pero for post-employment benefit plan, specifically defined benefit plan, yung service cost at net interest sa profit or loss, while remeasurements ay sa OCI. So kanina nagmamanifest ka, I will become a CPA. Ang mnemonics naman natin dito for remeasurements ay ARA. In Chavacano, ARA means now. So starting now, we will manifest I will become a CPA. ARA. ARA mismo. So A, actuarial gains and losses. So again, pag gain yan, then credit yan sa OCI. Pag loss yan, debit yan sa OCI. Return on plan assets, ROPA. Pero i-exclude natin yung interest income, yung na-compute natin sa letter B kanina, yung interest income on plan assets. So ang tawag ko dito, ROPA difference. Kasi yung total ROPA minus yung interest income. And then, asset ceiling effect changes, or yung tawag ko dito ay ACE difference, asset ceiling effect difference. Kasi yung total asset ceiling effect during the year minus the interest cost, yung kinompute din natin sa B kanina, yun yung ilalagay mo dyan sa ACE difference. So let's have a practice. Information on Esmeralda Company's defined benefit plan is shown below. Fair value of plan assets, January 1, 700,000. Present value of defined benefit obligation, January 1, 550,000. Current service cost, 240,000. Past service cost, June 1, 2020. Average vesting period is 5 years, 150,000. Sa revised na standard, yung past service cost, we already ignore yung vesting period, no? Hindi na natin yan kino-consider. Sa old kasi, ina-apportion yan sa vesting period. Pero now, hindi na po. Benefits paid, 105,000. Return on plan assets or ROPA, 150,000. Contribution to the plan, 455,000. Increase in obligation during the year due to changes in actuarial assumption, 60,000. So just a clarification, kapag nag-increase ang obligation dahil sa actuarial assumptions, ibig sabihin, magke-credit yung liability. So meron tayong actuarial loss. Yung corresponding debit is actuarial loss, 60,000. Expected rate of return, 12%. Discount rate, 10%. Take note, from this 2%, what we will use is discount rate or 10%. The present value of economic benefits available in the form of refunds are 100,000 and 200,000 on January 1 and December 31, respectively. Yung sentence na yan, it signifies that yung 100,000 is yung asset ceiling on January 1 at 200,000 is yung asset ceiling sa December 31. So we will answer some questions. First question, how much is the net defined benefit liability or asset as of January 1, 2020? So para i-compute yan, i-compute muna natin kung merong deficit or surplus. The present value of defined benefit obligation on January 1 is 550,000. The fair value of plan asset on January 1 is 700,000. So, mas malaki po ang asset. Therefore, meron tayong surplus na 150,000. Is this automatic na net defined benefit asset? No. We compare it with the asset ceiling. The asset ceiling is 100,000 on January 1. Therefore, the net defined benefit asset on January 1 is the lower amount, which is 100,000, which is the asset ceiling. Dahil mas maliit ang asset ceiling, meron tayong asset ceiling effect amounting to 50,000. So mamaya gagamitin natin yung asset ceiling effect, pero the answer to the question is the net defined benefit asset at January 1 is 100,000, which is the lower amount, the asset ceiling of 100,000. Question number 2. How much is the net defined benefit liability or asset as of December 31? So, unlike kanina, meron kasi tayong values for present value of defined benefit obligation at fair value for plan asset on January 1. For this case, hindi natin alam magkano na sila on December 31. So, i-compute muna natin. So, step 1 is compute for PVDBO on December 31. So, please take note that ito ang magiging effect sa PVDBO. Take note, hindi po ito actual account title. We just use the T account para klaro yung ating computation. Pero hindi po ito account title na ginagamit for journal entries. Hindi din ito account title that we maintain a T account for it. So, for computation purposes lang. Ang beginning balance ng PBDBO ay 550,000 if you take note. Ang mag-i-increase ng obligation mo ay kapag merong current service cost, 240, past service cost, 150,000, interest cost, which is based on the discount rate 10%. Normally, yung interest, minumultiply mo yung 10% sa beginning balance na 550. So, that's additional 55,000. And then, di ba sabi ko kanina, merong increase in obligation due to actuarial assumptions. Yun yung actuarial loss, 60,000. Pero in terms of sa obligation, dinagdagan niya yung obligation. So that's 60,000. Kailan naman nababawasan ang obligation? Kapag nagbayad ka ng benefits, so minus 105,000. Therefore, the ending balance of the PBDVO is 950,000 pesos. Step 2 is compute for FVPA on December 31. For fair value of plan asset naman, again, this is not an actual T account for computation purposes lang. Beginning balance is 700,000. Kailan? Tingnan nyo, bakit ko dito siya nilagay sa debit? Kasi asset siya. Kailan siya nadadagdagan? Kapag merong returns or yung ROPA, 150,000. Sir, bakit hindi tayo magdadagdag ng interest income? Take note that the interest is already kasali na yun doon sa return on plan assets. When you talk about return on plan assets, lahat-lahat na yan ng return, interest and other returns. So, nandyan na yan sa 150. Contributions, nagdagdag ka ng contribution, so dagdag din yun sa asset mo, 455. Kailan naman siya nababawasan? Again, pag nagbayad ka ng benefit. That's 105,000. So, ang ending balance mo for FVPA ay 1,200,000. So, pwede na tayong mag-compute ng deficit or surplus. So, ang PBDVO natin, based sa na-compute natin, 950,000. FVPA natin ay 1,200,000. Therefore, ang ating surplus at the end of the year, 250,000. Pero again, hindi yan automatic na asset. I-compare sa asset ceiling. Sa December 31, the asset ceiling is 200,000. So the net defined benefit asset at December 31 is the lower value, which is the asset ceiling of 200,000. In the same way, meron na naman tayong asset ceiling effect na 50,000 on December 31. Again, mamaya ko i-explain saan natin gagamitin yung mga na-compute nating asset ceiling effect. But for this certain question, the answer is net defined benefit asset 200,000. Question number 3. How much is the defined benefit cost to be recognized in profit or loss? Remember our mnemonics, CPA, III. So to compute, C, current service cost, 240,000. P, past service cost, 150,000. A, any gain or loss on settlement, which is wala. I, interest cost on PBDVO, that's computed as yung beginning balance ng PBDVO nung January 1, 550,000 times 10% discount rate, that's 55,000. Interest income on FVPA, again computed as beginning balance ng FVPA na 700,000 times yung discount rate na 10%, that's 70,000. But take note, minus kasi po ito ay interest income and all the others are cost or expenses. So the income technically offsets the cost. And finally, interest cost on asset ceiling effect. Di ba nung beginning, meron tayong asset ceiling effect na 50,000. So again, i-multiply din natin yun sa discount rate na 10%. So ang interest dun sa asset ceiling effect is 10%, which is 5,000 pesos. Interest cost yan. So ang total na defined benefit cost, which is to be recognized in PL, ay 380,000. So wag niyong kalimutan, CPA, III. Also, kapag po ang na-compute nyo ay hindi net defined benefit asset, kundi net defined benefit liability, wala kang magiging asset ceiling effect. Kasi nagkaka-asset ceiling effect ka lang naman pag meron kang surplus. Pag meron ka namang deficit, wala kang asset ceiling effect. So, defined benefit cost, again, that would be recognized in profit or loss is 380,000. Next question, how much is the defined benefit cost to be recognized in OCI? So, anong mnemonics natin? ARA. A, actuarial gain or loss, 60,000. Take note that loss yan, so normal, parang cost, no? 60,000, debit. Next are ROPA difference. Diba? Take note that yung total nating return on plan asset or ROPA is 150,000. Pero, total na yon. And nag-compute tayo ng interest income kanina. Ang interest income kanina for fair value of plan asset is 70,000. So, ang ROPA difference, di ba 150 yung total, tapos 70 yung interest, then yung iba is 80,000 na income din, which is to be recognized in OCI. Dahil income yan or credit, i-deduct yan. And finally, letter A, ACE difference. Again, meron lang din tayong ACE difference kasi asset tayo or net defined benefit asset. Pag net defined benefit liability ka naman, wala kang ACE difference. Ano naman tong asset ceiling effect difference? Okay. 'Di ba? Yung asset ceiling effect natin nung beginning 50,000. If you remember, 150 versus 100. So that's 50,000. At the end of the year, ang asset ceiling effect natin is 50,000 din, which is 250,000 versus 200,000 na asset ceiling. So, nung beginning, 50,000. Nung ending, 50,000. So, technically, during the year, dapat walang nag-change sa asset ceiling effect. Kaya yan, 0. But take note, merong interest ang beginning balance na 5,000. So, pag sa T-account yan, magde-debit ka ng 5,000. So, anong gagawin mo para ma-offset yung effect na debit na 5,000 para yung 50 maging 50 pa rin sa end? So, technically, i-credit mo ang 5. Magka-credit ka ng 5,000. So, yun po ang ACE difference. At dahil nag-credit ka ng 5,000, then deduct 5,000. Again 50 kasi sa beginning, 50,000, at 50,000 din sa ending. So, wala technically change. Pero dahil may interest na parang dinebit mo sa 5,000, so, para ma-offset yun, kailangan mo rin mag-credit ng 5,000. Pero hindi sa PL, kundi sa OCI. Kasi yun po ang ACE difference. So, ang total ay negative 25,000 ang mapupunta sa OCI. At dahil negative, meaning i-credit mo yung OCI. So, the last question is, what are the journal entries to be prepared on December 31? Take note, for defined benefit plan, 2 lang ang journal entries na kailangan mong gawin. Entry number 1 is for the contributions made. For the contributions made, the journal entry is debit, net defined, benefit, asset, or liability. Yung contribution natin, di ba, 455,000 and credit cash, 455,000 to record the contributions made. At ang entry number 2 is yung para sa defined benefit cost, both for yung ilalagay mo sa PL at yung ilalagay mo sa OCI. Please remember sa computations natin kanina, yung sa PL 380,000, yung sa OCI 25,000 na credit. So ang entry natin ay debit, defined benefit expense na mapupunta sa profit or loss 380,000. Credit OCI dash remeasurements, 25,000. If you squeeze that, ang credit mo is net defined benefit asset or liability for the difference amounting to 355,000 pesos to record the defined benefit cost for the year. So yan lang po ang dalawang journal entry. So to check everything, if sa T account na talaga yan, di ba yung net defined benefit asset natin on January 1 is 100,000. For entry number 1, nag-debit ka ng 455,000 sa account title na net defined benefit asset or liability na 455,000. Tapos nung entry number 2, nag-credit ka naman nung account na yon for 355,000. So if you take into account all those entries, the net defined benefit asset on December 31 is actually 200,000 pesos. And that is what we computed dun sa question number 2. So, pwede nyo rin naman gawin na ito yung magiging computation nyo to answer magkano yung net defined benefit asset or liability at the end. No? Pero more of pang-checking ito if tama ba yung naging process natin. So I hope that was clear. Employee benefits, specifically defined benefit plan, is very procedural in nature. If nagets mo yung steps from the first question to the last, wala kang magiging problema sa employee benefits. So lastly, for presentation of the accounts, an entity shall recognize yung account title na net defined benefit liability or asset in the statement of financial position. When an entity has a surplus, it shall measure the net defined benefit asset at the lower of the surplus and the asset ceiling using the discount rate, which is diniscuss ko na kanina. So that would be all for this video. It's your time to test your knowledge. Again, if you know the answers to these questions, comment your answer down below. Question number 1. What is the meaning of net interest in relation to a defined benefit cost? A. Interest expense on defined benefit liability. B. Interest income on the fair value of plan assets. C. The difference between interest expense on defined benefit liability and interest income on the fair value of plan assets. Or D. Interest expense on defined benefit liability less applicable income tax. And question number 2, the following data relate to the defined benefit plan of Khalid Company for the year ended December 31, 2020. Present value of defined benefit obligation January 1, 15 million. Fair value of plan asset January 1, 14 million. Contribution during the year 1,050,000. Current service cost 800,000. Benefits paid during the year 1,500,000. Present value of defined benefit obligation December 31, 17,410,000. Fair value of plan asset December 31, 14,920,000. Discount rate 6%. Expected rate of return 7%. What amount of net remeasurement gain or loss should be reported in the OCI? A. 530,000. B. 840,000. C. 1,680,000. Or D. 2,210,000. Again, if you know the answers, comment your answer down below. So that would be all for today. Thank you very much for listening and watching this video. If you have questions, you may comment sa aking social media accounts. You may message me there. And like, comment, and share this video para mas marami ang makakanood ng ating mga video tutorials. And if pag nakakalimutan mo pa, please do subscribe to my channel. And please don't forget that every day is an opportunity for us to learn something new. So that would be all for today. Thank you very much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!